Testing one, two, three. Testing for captions. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. Is that the crackling? Is it just when this mic's being used? Everything in the room. Testing. Oh, testing one. Yeah, yeah. Testing again for captions on English. Wow. Testing for captions on English. One, two, three, four. Testing for captions on English. Testing English captions, one, two, three. Testing English captions, one, two, three. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, it's definitely there. It's overmodulated.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Wednesday, August 19th. It is 9:01 a.m., and I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm being joined this morning by Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Sean McGuire, and Board Member Nicole Morgan, and we're being joined virtually by Board Member Jared Blumenfeld. We're also joined this morning. We will be joined at some point here later by our Executive Director, Eric Oppenheimer. We're joined by our two Chief Deputies, Karen Mogus and Eric Ekdahl. We have here with us Assistant Chief Counsel, Andy Sawyer, and the Clerk of the Board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her is Margie Argel and Elizabeth Carrillo. As you can see, this is a hybrid meeting with both in-person and web components. If you're joining us virtually, you're either viewing us through the YouTube live website or the Cal EPA website. But if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to be on the Zoom platform. There is a link and instructions at the top of the agenda on how to get onto the platform. But if you are having any challenges, please do just email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help get you onto the platform. Once you are on the platform, your camera will be off. You will be on mute until it's your turn to speak on the item you've indicated. For everyone in the room, good morning, everyone. Good to see you. We're here in Sacramento in the California Environmental Protection Agency building. A few announcements here for us as well. Please do observe the exits. If we happen to have an emergency, we'll calmly file out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await further direction. Additionally, if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, there is a QR code at the side of the room. There is also a laptop to sign up. If you're having any challenges, please do just speak to the board clerk. And when you come up to the mic, please do introduce yourself and any affiliation that you may have. And lastly, please do just silence our phones so we have an uninterrupted discussion this morning. This is the second day of our two-day board meeting, so we'll dive right into item number 8 this morning, which is an item from the Division of Drinking Water regarding emergency regulations for the lead and copper rule improvements. And I'll hand things over to the panel. Good morning. Good to see you, Mr. Palamas.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel. Just very quickly from myself for my last board meeting here, presenting as Deputy Director. I'm happy to introduce lead and copper rule. It is been said by our esteemed former chair, Felicia Marcos, the most complicated rule she felt forced to sign and implement when she was a regional administrator in US EPA. We are happy that in this moment we'll be catching back up to some of the primacy packages components that we were behind on. So this is a big step for California to get this done. Staff today will fully explain what's going on as we kind of go through that process, and I don't really want to take away their thunder, so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Frederick, and she will introduce the item and the team presenting here today, and off we go.
Thanks, Darren. Good morning, Board Chair Esquivel, board members, colleagues, and guests. Today's agenda item is translated into Spanish, so before we get started, we would like to ask that all presenters, board members, attendees providing public comments speak slowly and pause occasionally to allow the interpreters to accurately capture your remarks. Today's agenda item will also be simultaneously broadcast into Spanish on the Cal EPA webcast website. If you are in the meeting room and require Spanish interpretation services, please raise your hand and a headset will be provided to you. Now I'd like to invite our interpreter, Omkar Kalaskar, to translate the information before we get started.
Buenos días, presidente Esquivel, integrantes de la Junta, colegas, invitados. El tema del programa de hoy se va a interpretar en español. Entonces, antes de comenzar, solo quisiéramos pedirles a todos los ponentes, integrantes de la Junta y participantes aquí que vayan a hacer comentarios públicos, que hablen despacio, por favor, y que hagan pausas periódicas, solo con el fin de permitirles a los intérpretes comunicar con precisión sus comentarios. El tema del programa de hoy también se va a emitir simultáneamente en español en el sitio web de la emisión web de CalEPA. Si hay alguien aquí presente en la sala de reunión que necesite interpretación en español, por favor levante la mano y le podemos traer los auriculares con un dispositivo para escuchar la interpretación. Ya sería todo. Muchas gracias.
Looks like we're ready to get going. My name is Michelle Frederick, and I am the Assistant Deputy Director of the Division of Drinking Water for our Central California Field Operations Branch. With me today is Wes Sterringer Cisneros, who leads our lead and copper unit. Two of our attorneys from the Office of Chief Counsel, David Rice and Emily Roberts. And of course, our legendary, or soon to be legendary, Darren Bohemus. We are here today to discuss the adoption of the federal regulation for the lead and copper rule improvements, or LCRI for short. Next slide. As just a high-level overview for today's presentation, staff are fundamentally seeking to obtain board approval for the adoption of the federal LCRI without any material changes in order to obtain primacy from US EPA. Staff posted the draft regulations on May 2025 and held a workshop on June 11th for public input. The proposed regulations are located on the website on the bit.ly link shown here. Next slide. The federal LCR regulations are very complex, as Darren previously mentioned, and are about 135 pages in total. So before we dive in, I want to make sure that we all share the same vocabulary. On the figure in yellow, you'll see the service line. Upstream of the meter is generally owned by the public water system, and downstream is usually owned by the customer. When one thinks of lead in drinking water, Flint, Michigan, for example, the lead contamination is primarily associated with that yellow service line being made of lead, or galvanized pipes that are downstream of lead pipes that have accumulated lead over time. The plumbing in the home is not directly considered in the LCRI, but rather water samples tested from faucets in high-risk areas across the distribution system provide an indication if there is contamination present. The laboratory results of the drinking water samples from faucets at customers' home is mathematically used to calculate a 90th percentile. That must be lower than the lead action level. An exceedance of the lead action level means that 10% of the water systems are above the allowable level, and actions must be taken. Next slide. And so I just quickly want to also highlight one other item that comes up, and that's connectors. And so they're also sometimes called goosenecks and pigtails. These connectors are usually bendable pieces of pipe that connect water mains, water meters, or into buildings. So an example of that is shown in the green circle there. Next slide. And so with all of that out of the way, today we will be quickly summarizing the lead and copper rule improvement requirements, the findings of the initial lead service line inventory, the rulemaking authority under which we propose to adopt the regulation, an estimate of the number of impacted water systems, a summary of our workshop and written comments, and coordination on Assembly Bills 1096 and 2370. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but lead and copper has a very long history in California. There are a few key dates that I just want you to be aware of as we go forward. Lead solder and pipes were officially banned in 1986. In January 2010, the definition of lead-free was significantly tightened and is applicable to the regulations that we'll talk about today. October 2024 is when the LCRI was published, and then later in October 2024, some of the initial elements were required to be completed. And then the LCRI compliance dates, the first ones are November 2027. Next slide. So the results from our initial service line findings that were due in October 2024 show that out of approximately 10 million service lines reported, 0 were reported to be lead, which we're very excited about. California, like other West Coast states, historically did not appear to use lead pipes extensively. There is some history of it, but it was not used in the way that it might have been on the East Coast or in the Midwest. Oregon also has 0 lead lines, and Washington State has about 0.01% lead lines. That said, we have approximately 700,000 unknown service lines, 13,000 galvanized lines requiring replacement, and about 860 known lead connectors in California. The division has created a map that is accessible on our website that allows you to put in your address, select your water system, and see the type of service lines that are in your water system. So you can see that on the right there on the slide. And the website for that is down below. Next slide. So given that background information, the new federal LCRI requirements has 6 focus areas. Additional service line inventory work, for example, finding out what those unknown service lines are. Replacement requirements for lead and some galvanized pipelines. 3, enhanced lead and copper sampling. 4, additional requirements for corrosion control treatment. 5, enhanced public notice. And 6, the requirement that schools and childcare facilities be given the option to be sampled for lead. One of the major highlights of this rule is a decrease in the action level from 15 parts per billion to 10 parts per billion. Again, this is the level at which 10% of the water samples are elevated and defines when corrosion control treatment is required. Next slide. As proposed, the new LCRI regulations would take effect on November 1st, 2027 to align with the main LCRI compliance dates. Simultaneously, on November 1st, 2027, the existing lead and copper regulations in Chapter 17.5 would be removed. This will allow the existing lead and copper regulations to continue to be implemented until replaced by the LCRI. Ideally, primacy then would be transferred from US EPA to the Water Board shortly thereafter. Next slide. Staff proposes to adopt the federal LCRI into the California Code of Regulations through the rulemaking process outlined in Health and Safety Code Section 11365.03. This allows the federal requirements of a regulation enacted through the Safe Drinking Water Act to be adopted as an emergency regulation, provided that they are no more stringent or materially different than the federal regulation. Staff can then later return, if directed by the board, to make California enhancements through the normal rulemaking process. Next slide. One second. Examples of some non-substantive changes made to the federal LCRI include just renumbering sections, tables, and figures. Next slide. Other non-substantive changes include inserting actual compliance dates, removing requirements that were not applicable before November 1st, 2027, and exercising state discretion. For example, we inserted the California-specific 1986 lead ban and the 2010 California adoption date for lead-free standards where appropriate. States also had discretion on whether to include small system compliance flexibility options for the LCRI, and staff is proposing to include that option in the draft regulations. Next slide. So I'm not going to read all the details here, but we did want to make them publicly available to put some context around the existing lead and copper action levels and their impacts. Overall, there are currently a total of 49 public water systems with lead action level exceedances above 15 parts per billion, 48 with lead action level exceedances for copper. The populations listed represent the full populations of the water systems, but typically means that at least 10% of the samples were over the action level. I think it's important to note that approximately 1/3 of the water systems are disadvantaged communities and/or majority communities of color, and 86% are small water systems. As another aside, schools listed here are schools that are also public water systems. Schools that obtain their water from a public water system will be discussed later. Next slide. So the estimated impact of decreasing the 90th percentile lead action level from 15 parts per billion to 10 parts per billion is provided on this slide and includes an estimated 72 new public water systems representing a total water system population of approximately 280,000 people. Next slide. And then to talk about the funding and the funding gaps, ironically, the state currently has both an excess funding and an insufficient amount of funding because of the limitations of how the various funding types can be utilized. US EPA provided approximately $200 million for inventory evaluations, lead service line, and lead connector replacement. Because California's lead challenges tend to be with things like pre-2010 solder, older fixtures, lead, and valves, instead of lead pipes, California will be returning approximately $175 million to EPA to be used in other states where more significant lead service line issues exist. There is some funding available through the Department of Social Services that currently supports the implementation of sampling in child care centers and can be utilized for replacement of premise plumbing, that's plumbing inside the house or building, but is not believed to be sufficient to do all the necessary ongoing remediation and sampling. Additionally, there is approximately $115 million from Proposition 2 from the Department of General Services for K-12 public schools through the lead and water testing and remediation program funding, which focuses on schools with lead sample levels over 15 parts per billion. It is anticipated that this leaves significant gaps around family child care homes, private schools, household plumbing, and other water system requirements. Next slide. And now I'm going to turn it over to Wes to continue our presentation. Thanks, Wes.
Thanks. Good morning. So in preparations for bringing the proposed LCRI regulations to the board, the staff began a robust public outreach process in May of 2026 with outreach support from the Department of Education and the Department of Social Services. There were over 1,000 people registered for the staff-led webinar on June 11th. The webinar was completed both in English and in Spanish, thanks to significant help from our Office of Public Engagement, Equity, and Tribal Affairs. Most of the questions and concerns that came up in the public comment process was related to how the new LCRI impacts schools and childcare facilities, and how the policy handbook under AB 1096 will be implemented. Because there are so many questions on these topics, I'm going to spend some extra time on the history and definitions, even though staff are not currently bringing the adoption of the policy handbook to the board at this time. Next slide, please. The LCRI definitions here require water systems to outreach to schools and childcare facilities to offer testing and inform them of the health impacts of lead. These definitions are very broad and do not exactly match the state categories, particularly as they relate to childcare. As defined by the LCRI, childcare is a location that houses a provider of childcare, daycare, or early learning services to children as licensed by the state, local, or tribal licensing agency. Next slide. From 2017 to 2019, public schools that were constructed before January 2010 were mandated to do a one-time testing event for lead in their water through either a permit requirement or Assembly Bill 746. And those samples needed to be completed by July 1st, 2019. Next slide, please. Assembly Bill 2370 requires that child daycare centers constructed before January 2010 begin sampling for lead by January 1st, 2023, and then repeat every 5 years. The State Water Board makes all test results available to the public on its Child Care Center lead sampling program website. The bill also requires corrective actions for any sample exceeding 5 parts per billion. There are several types of licensed childcare in California. AB 2370 only includes child daycare centers, while specifically excluding family daycare homes, another licensed type of daycare in California. Because the LCRI definition is so broad, it is anticipated that these family daycare homes will be included in the LCRI. Next slide, please. And the last lead bill I'm going to discuss today is AB 1096, passed in 2025. Because the LCRI does not mandate that schools and childcare centers sample for lead, but instead allows them to decline sampling, AB 1096 was passed to increase public transparency of the lead sampling efforts. The bill requires tracking the reasons schools and childcare facilities decline lead sampling. It ensures the information is made publicly available online on a state water board's website, and requires water systems to put lead health risk information and a link to the State Water Board's website in its Consumer Confidence Report. It also allows the State Water Board to develop a handbook to provide direction on information submittal and provide for any statewide sampling waivers when another sampling program meeting the requirements of the LCRI is in place to prevent duplicative sampling. Next slide, please. To put this historical sampling into context, based on the approximately 8,000 schools served by a public water system and sampled from 2017 to 2019, 201 schools had lead concentrations greater than 15 parts per billion, and another 244 schools had samples between 10 parts per billion and 15 parts per billion. There were actions required for schools above 15 parts per billion, including notifying parents, doing additional testing, shutting down or replacing faucets or fountains, and providing potable water where faucets were shut down. Next slide, please. Of the childcare centers, the daycare centers sampled as a result of AB 2370, approximately 2,300 had a lead sample above 5 parts per billion out of approximately 14,000 facilities. There is no data currently available for the approximately 14,000 family daycare homes that exist because it was excluded from AB 2370, and no data available for other types of childcare facilities to which the regulation may apply. It is important to state that remediation for many of these facilities may have already been completed, as actions are required under AB 2370 if drinking water results are greater than 5 parts per billion. These are similar to the requirements for schools, except they are required at a more stringent level. Okay, next slide, please. With that background, staff received 4 written comment letters. The comments generally fit into 3 categories: support for adopting the federal LCRI through the emergency regulations process, since there were not significant changes from the federal document; comments both for and against providing any type of waiver for sampling at schools and childcare facilities. We received 1 commenter that had a specific recommendation on the LCRI text that requested changes and clarifications on outreach and sampling responsibilities. Staff are still evaluating the waiver process, and more public outreach will be completed as part of the AB 1096 policy handbook creation. The proposed changes to the LCRI text will be held for future consideration if California enhancements are done at a later time, since materially altering the federal LCRI text would prevent it from being adopted through the emergency regulation process. Next slide, please. In addition to written comments, we had approximately 80 questions that were put in the chat for the June 11th workshop, and a resulting FAQ in English and in Spanish has been posted on our website. The 4 recurring key questions included: 1, what type of childcare facilities will be included in the LCRI? 2, how will water systems know where to find family daycare home facilities because their physical addresses are legally required to remain confidential? 3, will a waiver be granted to prevent duplicative sampling at childcare centers that conducted sampling in accordance with AB 2370? And 4, who is paying for sampling and remediation costs for schools and childcare facilities? Next slide, please. Answers to these questions include that outreach to both childcare centers and family childcare homes are expected to be included in the LCRI. Staff are still working to determine if any other facilities may be appropriate to include. DDW is evaluating the potential for a waiver for those childcare centers sampled in accordance with Assembly Bill 2370 to avoid duplicative sampling. Michelle previously discussed funding availability and gaps, but not all sampling and remediation are likely covered at this point. Next slide, please. And to answer the final question, about how water systems will identify all the schools and childcare facilities in their service areas, staff are currently developing a mapping tool for community water systems that uses the water system boundaries we have on file and combines them with school and daycare facility locations available online. The Division of Drinking Water is still working on how to ensure the privacy issues of family daycare home facility addresses. How do we ensure that those remain confidential? And so we're continuing to work with the Department of Social Services to develop that. Sorry, went off script a bit. Next slide, please. And this screenshot is an example of the mapping tool that is currently under development to support water systems to find schools and childcare facilities in their boundaries to ensure both privacy and public health requirements are met. Okay. Next slide, please. In conclusion, additional LCRI guidance is expected from the US EPA this fall, and staff anticipate initiating the AB 1096 handbook public process after the release of this guidance. The Division of Drinking Water has begun technical trainings for water systems, with the first being just last week at the AWWA Water Education Seminar, and anticipate continuing those throughout late 2026 and 2027. And finally, staff recommends adopting the federally mandated LCRI regulations without material changes. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of appreciation in this effort here, knowing that there is no safe level of lead exposure, especially for children. So just really appreciate the leadership and work to get this off across the finish line. And I have no questions at this point, but looking to fellow board colleagues if they have any question and comment. Board Member McGuire.
Yes, agreed. Thank you for the good presentation and the work to get this regulation to where it is today. I know it's been a long process in the making to get to this point. So glad to help support getting across the finish line and on to the next step. If you could pull up slide 14 for a minute about the estimated water system impacts. I just wanted to make sure I'm tracking. Because this is, Mr. Pohimas, to your point about the reference to Felicia Marcus, a very complicated regulation. And so I think it's going to take some education and outreach and technical assistance to the water systems that are impacted by this in some fashion to help them understand what they need to do. And so I was wondering if you could, just looking at these statistics that you have, it looks like the majority of the population is in a disadvantaged community and also in a community of color. So just wondering, what does it actually mean in practice to exceed, for a water system to exceed the action level? And for example, it brought to mind our failing system list under the SAFER program. Does it move a water system over into the failing category? And if so, what do we do in those situations? So just maybe a little alignment with how this impacts water systems in the real world.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member McGuire. It is challenging. It is something, though, that we have been doing historically, in the sense that when you get to, you're over that action level exceedance, we do have, it requires corrosion control is usually the first step. And, additional sampling, corrosion control treatment. And so you can do things like change the pH of the water. You can put in an additive that changes. Oftentimes it's orthophosphate or some other additive that will change the composition of the water so that it does not pull as much lead and copper out of the pipes. So there are actually technical changes that can be done to address that. And so that is something that we are used to dealing with. There are slight differences between the new LCRI and the old lead and copper rule. There are some things that were previously allowed that are no longer allowed, different type of phosphates and things like that. But we do work with water systems. Our field office branches usually work with them on those elements. And I mean, from a SAFER standpoint, it depends on whether, what you're violating. If it's a monitoring and reporting violation, it wouldn't put you on the failing list, but if you were over on an action level, it would. Darren, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, just to make sure everybody's understanding what we're actually picking up when we're doing these samples. It's almost always the brass fixtures that are within the home. I think one of the reasons we see it broadly in disadvantaged communities is the age of the home and the fixtures that are in those residences leads to it. And then kind of secondarily, running corrosion control is not an easy treatment technique. And it's kind of why California and the Division of Drinking Water have been pushing for years to eliminate all the possible sources of lead, because we're relying on a human-controlled type of activity that obviously can go awry, as it did in Flint, Michigan, and other places around. So we really are in California not struggling with lead pipes, as you saw earlier in the earlier slide, but really these brass fixtures are largely what's there. And we do have aggressive water in California, runoff from the Sierra Nevadas that hasn't really mineralized, and lot can be quite aggressive. And so that can also contribute to our issues and have to have these processes to try to do it. So it's kind of the unspoken story about lead and copper is that even when we're done eliminating every piece of lead within a drinking water system, we will still have this history of old fixtures in houses that will require us to remain vigilant and continue to monitor and test and do these activities associated with trying to control lead.
Can I ask just quickly, when it comes to the exceedances, where is the testing occurring for the systems?
Yeah,
is this
point. Well, let's explain that a little bit. So it actually happens in the homes. It's really delivered water testing, which is different than most of the testing we do in the Division of Drinking Water and the water systems do, in that there are sample containers given to voluntary residences with instructions on how to pull the sample. We ask that it be from like the kitchen sink or oftenly used bathroom, stuff where people would be exposed to drinking the water per se, not an outside hose bib that no one's using or stuff like that are really key in the instructions. So we're relying on individuals in the home to be part of our sampling, which can lead to a lot of sampling errors. We struggle with that a lot. There's a lot of education that the water systems have to do to make sure that it's happening right and that the length of time that the water sat was done. There's another common example of we often hear where a homeowner will be like, well, I'll make sure no one uses that faucet. I'll turn off the water stop underneath the sink so my kids can't use it. Well, that creates all kinds of other problems because it can loosen up debris that may not have been there. Those valves don't get turned very often. So little things like that make it complicated. But it is a really interesting in that it is really only one of the few samples we do right at where a consumer would be taking the water and then consuming it.
Yeah, very different, and appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you for the additional explanation. I think I'm still trying to unpack if there's an exceedance of an action level. So with the number being reduced from 15 to 10. So for those systems now, and maybe they need to implement corrosion
Yeah,
control.
most of them will have probably are skating above the 15, or sorry, between the 10 and the 15, and are not using corrosion control. And now that'll be imposed on them, along with those other stuff that Ms. Frederick could cover, that there are options for them. There are small disadvantage activities that can happen. I'll let you explain what those are. You're going to know them better off the top of your head
Yeah,
than me.
I was also going to say that we also have technical specialists on our team that do outreach and help with implementation of corrosion control. In California, we have 3 specialists that can help support that too. I know oftentimes that they help when there are school issues and things like that where there's a unique challenge.
Yeah. Well, great. I appreciate that. And I think that's it's a year before these regulations will take effect. So I think there's a year there that we can do some significant outreach to these systems to help get them in compliance with the upcoming regulation. Because the last thing I want to do is set up a dynamic where we're unfortunately adding more systems to our failing list. Ultimately, you had the slide on funding, and just yesterday we adopted our intended use plan for safe drinking water, and there's an acknowledged $1+ billion funding gap over the next 3 years alone. So, everything we can do to help systems stay off the list in the first place, I think is going to be to our benefit and to their benefit. I know it's challenging with the homes and the brass fixtures and the testing in this case, but nonetheless, it's a pretty large number population impacted. So just wanted to flag
Yeah,
that.
it is definitely. And if I could just, calling on what we saw as a result of the state's school testing, a lot of schools really just removed the fixture and replaced it with a more modern fixture, and that solved a lot of their problems. When you're looking at really small communities, they may only pull 5 or 10 samples, and it could be one sample that is one faucet. So we will definitely work with them. If that's the case, that's definitely a lot cheaper to, help that homeowner replace that faucet that was the one sample that threw them over instead of doing corrosion control. And I think we'll see a lot of that happen in this instance as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you, board member. Looking to see if any other members have any comments or questions. The one thing I was just going to bring up additionally, because, we are sending back lead and copper dollars or lead dollars to the feds here, is wondering, Mr. Volhamis, if there's been any discussion amongst the other states about developing a little more of a broadly applicable pot that could maybe get to some of these issues in childcare centers at least. I know, developing funding for the homeowner side of the responsibilities is, not something that's ever really been done, but at least to my mind, when it comes to childcare centers and being able to broaden some of the definitions and eligibility for at least the lead dollars that are out there, just wondering if there's any discussion amongst the other states, knowing that if it's just California asking, unlikely to happen, but if there's a broader coalition of states looking for a greater flexibility in that funding, maybe there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, no, I would say that there hasn't been, and largely because there are some states that are hugely impacted, and the total federal money available is a small margin of what they're going to face in total costs. So the money will all get spent. There won't be any left. I think that conversation may have happened if there was money left on the table and not any state could pick it up, but that's not going to happen. The Eastern Seaboard and Midwest have extensively led throughout their systems. I know even like my counterpart in Boston, when I talked to him, it's like 90% of their homes are, addressing lead pipe issues, and it's a long, big, expensive process. So I wouldn't do that. I would add that while we aren't able to use a lot of the federal funding in California for lead replacement, we were allowed and are using a large portion of that money to update our data system that will basically allow a better interaction for our systems around the lead and copper rule initially, and then be an enhancement later. So we have gotten a huge benefit from our initial foray of the federal funding, and that's nice because that computer system then won't be a burden on the fee payer, our water system fee payers. It'll be brought in basically with the federal money, which was part of the federal rules. They did craft in a way that we could use our set aside for that activity, and have been moving forward with that. So that is a benefit we did receive.
Yeah, really appreciate you taking advantage of that, and at least, again, to your point, are using some of those federal dollars to offset what would otherwise be the cost borne by the water agencies to do really critical data work. And looking forward to WaterTap and
Yep.
its eventual launch here. So thank you for that.
If I might just add to that, the California Department of Social Services did get funding from US EPA. It's just not probably going to be sufficient to do all of the work and remediation that may need to be done. So there was a pot of money, and I know they're trying to get additional funding, but it probably won't meet all the needs.
Certainly. No, I appreciate that. And we'll look forward to the EPA guidance as well. As Board Member McGuire said, I think this next year, as the rule is implemented, a lot of just groundwork to be done with the systems and helping to start just getting in motion the work that needs to be done. So much appreciation. We don't have any commenters on this item. And so, oh, we do have one commenter. Apologies. I have to go back to my virtual speaker card here. I'd like to call up Megan Murphy.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment and great presentation. I'm Megan Murphy. I'm the Senior Regulatory Advocate for the California Municipal Utilities Association, or CMUA. CMUA represents 89 publicly owned electric, gas, wastewater, and water utilities statewide, serving water to 75% of Californians. CMUA shares the board's commitment to minimizing lead and copper exposure in drinking water, and we really appreciate advance notice that staff gave us, especially because this was an emergency regulation process. That coordination was really helpful, and even got to preview some of the workshop. We support many of the aspects of the proposed regulation, including efforts to adopt the federal standard, having flexibility for small water system compliance, and the use of explicit compliance dates. However, there's a few areas in which we're seeking clarification for improved implementation. First, as mentioned, we're requesting that the Division of Drinking Water provide certainty that existing monitoring requirements that have already been fulfilled pursuant to AB 2370 satisfy the LCRI requirement for childcare facilities. And that's because we feel the sampling required under the California Department of Social Services program is more comprehensive and stringent. So some assurance that the state intends to avoid duplicative testing and the time that's already been spent would be appreciated. Second, we request the proposed regulatory language more clearly identifies schools as in child care facilities as the primary initiators in testing. Successful implementation requires active participation from these facilities, especially schools scheduling with the various school schedules, and achieving the stagnation times really requires a lot of coordination with those sites. And so making sure that the onus is not solely on the water systems is going to be essential for successful implementation. Next, we request that the regulation clearly distinguish between the water system's responsibilities and the property owners. So we do not create an obligation for water utilities to retest, remediate, replace, or otherwise manage customer-owned plumbing located downstream of the meter. And finally, as you saw in the preview, the tool, we're really supportive of that. That would be a great and effective means for water suppliers to quickly identify who qualifies, where they're at. So good luck with that and the coordination, and we really hope to see that successful. And we did see your response to comments, and that some of these areas that we're requesting are maybe more part of the California enhanced specific items, but we do hope that in future iterations we can make these modifications. So thank you for your time.
Thank you as well. Appreciate those comments, Ms. Murphy. I don't know if Ms. Frederick or Mr. Polhamus, if there's anything you wanted to comment. It sounds like, again, most of the requests here are for future enhancements. We're just adopting as is, but
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is if we were to do a waiver, and we have done some research to see, and it does appear to be more, meets this, it's as stringent as the EPA's requirements. That would be done through the AEB 1096 handbook. So after we get guidance from EPA that comes out in the fall, we will start that public outreach process for everyone so that that would be included in that phase of it. Thanks.
fantastic. Thank you. Looking back to my fellow board colleagues, if there's any question or comments or thoughts further, but then otherwise, I believe we're prepared for a motion.
I'll move to adopt the resolution.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member McGuire?
Aye.
Board Member Morgan?
Aye.
Board Member Blumenfeld?
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The vote is unanimous and the resolution is adopted. And if I can take just a moment as we transition then to our next item, and I just give a lot of thanks, appreciation, and congratulations to Mr. Polhamus. This is then the last item that we've had here. It was a unanimous vote. It went by very quickly and very well because of the good work that has been done and your leadership ultimately at the Division of Drinking Water. You know, your career, I know, spans further than just the time the division was transferred over to the board. And so when I think of the water quality work that the board has been able to do, the irrigated lands program, many other accomplishments, your mark has been indelibly left on this institution. And you're going to leave a big hole, but are very deserving of being able to retire here and know that you've created just an incredible component of the state board when it comes to the transfer of the Division of Drinking Water, its incorporation into our work, and the promise of being able to better regulate in the state across our water quality authorities to drinking water from tap to headwaters. And just want to express my deep appreciation to you, Mr. Polhamus, here in public, and just thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. This morning I was trying to figure out if there was a way I could count out how many board meetings I'd been at, and I don't think so, since I've been a deputy director for 20 years and did board meetings even before that, and over 30 years, there's probably a couple hundred. Not all of them are unanimous votes like this one, so I did bring you an easy one to make sure we go out on the right note, but it's been my pleasure, and certainly a capstone for me was the drinking water time I got to spend and really incorporate that. I think that is really important for water in California, and it fits so perfectly with the water board and how we conduct business, and really has improved it for the people of the state. So it's been my pleasure.
You're here. Well, on behalf of the board, we'll have further opportunity to embarrass you a bit and celebrate you, but just much appreciation, Darren.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That now concludes item number 8. We'll be bringing us here to item number 9. We'll give a few moments here for folks to swap out, but this is welcome to the public hearing. This is a public hearing to receive oral comments on the draft small municipal separate storm sewer system general permit, or MS4s. No action will be taken on this item today. The deadline for submitting written comments on this draft permit is Wednesday, September 2nd, 2026 at 12 noon. And we will have a presentation by Paul Levy, followed by public comments. I'll give a moment for the folks to transition here. All right. Great to see you this morning. Thank you for joining us. I'll hand things over to Mr. Levy.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Welcome to the draft small MS4 permit workshop. We released the draft on July 2nd, 2026 for a 60-day public comment period. We're going to be focusing today on changes we made from the informal draft we released in 2024, and also on changes made versus the currently effective 2013 permit. Then at the end of our presentation, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments. And as already stated, there's no state water board action taken today. The 60-day comment period will end September 2nd. Next slide, please. We're going to go quickly through background and history of the small MS4 permit, some small MS4 permit basics. Then we'll talk about the trash provisions, which are new to the permit, other significant changes, areas of special biological significance, or ASBS, and schools. And then we'll get to next steps and questions. Next slide, please. So in case anyone here doesn't know, MS4 is an acronym that stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. It's defined in the federal regulations, and the federal regulations also define size categories for the MS4s. So large and medium systems are defined as phase 1, with population greater than 100,000 being served by the system. And small systems serving a population of less than 100,000 are phase 2 systems. The phase 1 systems regulations came into effect first, and phase 2 systems were phased in later. So that's where the phase 1 and 2 comes from. And both are National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits, and the reissuance target for these is every 5 years. Next slide, please. So here in California, the first phase 2 small MS4 permit was adopted and went into effect in 2003. That permit was reissued in 2013. So that was the second iteration of this permit, or the first reissuance. There was a few amendments to it, but notably one larger amendment in 2017 to add TMDLs to the permit. And then more recently, we've been working on the third iteration of the permit. We released an informal draft in 2024, and just last month in July, we released the formal draft for comments that we're discussing today. And then if everything goes smoothly, we're hoping to bring it back in 2027 and get it adopted and effective in 2027. Next slide, please. So there are not quite, but almost 300 small MS4s covered by the permit across the state. These are broken into two categories, which are traditional and non-traditional. Traditional covers cities and counties. We have 171 of those, with two new ones being added to this permit, which are the City of Willits and the City of Mountain House. And then we have 111 non-traditionals, which are basically any publicly owned entity that's like a city and has a storm sewer system. So this could include military bases, prisons, hospitals, fairgrounds, college campuses, and the like. And we have two new non-traditionals right now, which are the Presidio of San Francisco, part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit. Next slide, please. At a high level, the small MS4 permit is broken into 6 topics or 6 categories called the 6 minimum control measures. These are defined in the federal regulations and required in every small MS4 permit. These are public education and outreach, public involvement and participation, illicit discharge detection and elimination, which has to do with making sure only stormwater is going into the storm drain, and spill cleanup and prevention. Then there's pollution prevention and good housekeeping, which is making sure that your own structures and maintenance activities are following stormwater friendly practices. Then there's construction site runoff control, which is making sure that during construction, while the soil is exposed, there's no erosion and runoff happening. And then post-construction stormwater management, which sets development standards to ensure that in the long term, after the construction is complete, the stormwater coming from the site will be not negatively impacting the water quality. Next slide, please. So in addition to those 6 basic minimum control measures, there are a few other things that have been added into the permit over time. There's TMDLs, which are site and facility or site and permittee specific. There's areas of special biological significance, which are for certain permittees along the coast and protected areas. And new to this permit are trash requirements, which are set by the statewide trash provisions. The trash provisions were incorporated in 2015 into 2 statewide water quality control plans, the Ocean Plan and the Inland Surface Waters, Enclosed Bays and Estuaries Plan. So by going into those 2 plans, the trash provisions are covering all the waters of the state across the whole state. But like all basin plans, these are not self-implementing, and for the trash provisions to be enforceable and to add any specific implementation details necessary, they have to go into the permits, including the small MS4 permit. Next slide, please. So the trash provisions set a narrative water quality objective for trash, that trash shall not be present in amounts that will negatively affect beneficial uses, and it also set a prohibition of discharge of trash to waters of the state. But then it further went on to define the prohibition of discharge to waters of the state for permitted dischargers by setting out requirements they could meet to show that they're not discharging. And those requirements include a deadline of December 2030 for any existing permittees, and a 10-year timeframe for any new permittees that are added to these permits as they're reissued to incorporate the trash provisions. These requirements defined 6 priority land uses, which are high-density residential, industrial, commercial, urban, mixed urban, and public transportation. And then it defined 2 options to address trash from the priority land uses. And it calls them Track 1 and Track 2. Track 1 is the full capture option, which requires you to install certified full capture devices that will capture all particles greater than 5 millimeters that are in the stormwater leaving these priority land use areas. Track 2 allows you to do a combination of full capture systems and other measures, which could be cleanups, signage, enhanced street sweeping, substitution of other areas, and you have to show that those all add up to the amount that would have been treated with the full capture devices. The provisions also define a very specific sizing method for the full capture devices using the rational equation. And these are all the things that are specifically in the trash provisions that we don't necessarily have a lot of leeway with while we're writing the permit. Next slide, please. The trash requirements in the permit are housed in attachment H. And to implement the requirements, we've added a trash implementation inventory. So that helps you track and also plan for trash devices that you put in, trash devices and other management practices that are going on already, and then ones that you're planning in the upcoming year. Attachment H asks for a trash generation map and an assessment plan to track and show trash generation in the priority land use areas in your system. It adds inspection requirements to make sure that the full capture devices and best management practices are functioning as intended and not regularly becoming overly full and then overtopping and allowing trash to just enter the water anyway. It also sets a method for demonstrating full capture system equivalency if you've chosen Track 2 as your compliance method. And it sets interim milestones, which the trash provisions require, but don't specifically set what they were. Next slide, please. Besides the trash provisions, which are probably the biggest new thing in the permit, there are a number of other significant changes that I'm just going to touch on today. We added an alternative compliance option to help meet TMDL requirements, and I will go into a little more detail on that one later. We made some changes to the post-construction requirements, and I'll go into a little more detail on that too. We added new TMDLs that have been adopted and gone into effect since the last permit and 2017 amendment happened. We've added cost reporting, which is in compliance with the recently adopted cost reporting policy. We're proposing pet waste inventory and outreach requirements to try and minimize dog waste going into the waters through stormwater. We've made some changes to illicit discharge inspections. In the 2024 informal draft, we were proposing some new facility-specific commercial and industrial inspections. Based on the comments, we pulled back on that and are focusing more on these higher-level priority area inspections. We're adding, compared to the 2013 permit, we're adding a new asset condition assessment to any maintenance and inspection activities for hard assets that the permittees own. So this is to cover asset management and to help with long-term planning for replacement and upkeep of these different assets. We're proposing snow removal and traction application requirements for permittees at elevations that receive significant amounts of snow. And we've increased construction site inspections. And by that, we mean we've made some of the added in annual inspections for ongoing projects. So if there's a multi-year project, it'll have to continue to be inspected. It won't just be the 1 year. Next slide, please. The alternative compliance option that we've added, this is the small MS4 permit, kind of equivalent of the enhanced watershed management plan that's in some of the other phase 1 permits. We based it on requirements that have already been adopted and implemented through the industrial general stormwater permit. This alternative compliance option was in the 2024 informal draft, and we've mostly maintained what we proposed there with a few tweaks and clarifications. And the alternative compliance option will help you satisfy, or will help permittees satisfy their TMDL compliance requirements, and it can help them show that they're meeting other discharge prohibitions and effluent receiving water limitations. The compliance options can be on-site or off-site, which means you can collaborate with your adjacent MS4s, and it requires you to capture the 85th percentile 24-hour storm. Next slide, please. Changes to the post-construction requirements include some changes to the low-impact development standards. We removed an exception that was in the 2013 permit for large single-family homes. We are proposing removing soil quality improvement and maintenance as a site design measure. Not that we don't want soil quality improvement and maintenance, but feedback we got from the regional boards made it sound like this is hard to verify what's been done and made it too easy to kind of check the box on site design measures in their view. We're proposing an allowance for offsite structural controls to meet peak flow requirements. So this could give more flexibility to the permittees and the developers. And we've also altered the 50% redevelopment rule. That rule has to do with if you're working on a site and you're only, say, touching half of the site, do you have to design the stormwater control for the whole site or only the half that you're working on? The way it was written in the existing permit, it seemed like it was being interpreted differently by different permittees, and so we added some language trying to clarify that and cover more situations. So whether you're altering only half the site or whether you're increasing the site by more than half of its existing footprint, both of those scenarios would require you to size your treatment device for the entire site instead of just the part you're working on. And then besides changes to the standards, we're proposing new inspection and field verification requirements. We're asking the permittees to verify that their low impact development standards have been followed prior to occupancy on any of the sites that have to implement them. And we're also proposing on-site inspections to verify maintenance condition for existing post-construction controls. The current permit has a self-certification program, and we're building on that to kind of follow up and verify verify the self-certifications and make sure the BMPs are being maintained. Next slide, please. As far as TMDLs, there are 14 new TMDLs in this permit. Comments from the informal draft were very site and permittee specific because each TMDL covers a very specific area and a specific pollutant and specific permittees. So we're not going to address all those at the meeting today, but in each case, they were considered and discussed with the relevant or the local regional board, and revisions were made to some of the TMDLs, including things like compliance timelines, sampling location and frequency, safety considerations during sampling, and timing and frequency of reports, and interpretation of some waste load allocations. Next slide, please. Attachment F is where we cover areas of special biological significance. There were no significant changes made to this since the informal draft. We're asking permittees to update and submit updated compliance plans, and we're asking all of the ASBS permittees to conduct one more year of monitoring of their discharge and of their receiving water. Next slide, please. Public schools is a topic that we'll expect to hear comments on. We were proposing including them at a previous version of this draft permit. The goal was to allow them to collaborate with the adjacent MS4s, maybe on some of these stormwater capture alternative compliance options. That's the new alternative compliance option we mentioned earlier. But there are just a lot of challenges to including schools, including limited resources by the schools to implement the permit, even just the minimum, most base requirements under the federal regs. And we plan on continuing to work with schools and the MS4s so that we can really understand how they interact with each other and what the full scope of what the opportunities of collaboration are and barriers to why that collaboration isn't happening as much as it could be now. But in the meantime, we are still encouraging schools to proactively address stormwater, put in stormwater capture projects and just be good stormwater stewards like everyone else. Next slide, please. So the current comment period ends September 2nd. That'll be the end of the 60 days from when it was released on July 2nd. After that, we'll go through all the comments, we'll catalog and sort and respond to each one. And unlike the informal draft released in 2024, this is a fully formal comment process. So all the comments will be released. We'll have specific responses for each comment, and then we'll draft revisions to the permit based on those comments. Bring that next draft back to the State Water Board to consider adopting, and the public can make comments again at that meeting, hoping that we can get this back in first quarter 2027. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation and, more importantly, the great work on the small MS4 permit here and changes. Just a quick acknowledgement as well around schools. I appreciate the language around encouraging schools to continue to be part of what are a lot of discussions out there around stormwater capture, the opportunity to invest in schools in a way that I feel matches up with a lot of the greening goals that are out there, as especially we see additional heat. I think there's ways in which our desire here to ensure that stormwater is a resource better being used in our municipalities can merge with other goals we have, certainly as we adapt to climate change. So just a lot of appreciation for still incorporating some language around all of that. Looking to fellow board colleagues, if there's any questions or comments here off the bat. We do have a number of commenters, so we can start to hear from them. Hearing none, let's go first to Jessica Lugo, be followed by Will Bond, and then Diane Wolk. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. My name is Jessica Lugo, and I'm the city manager for the city of Shasta Lake. I've had the honor of serving this community for over 22 years. Shasta Lake is a relatively young city, incorporated in 1993, but our community has a long history rooted in water. Our area grew from the construction of Shasta Dam, the creation of Shasta Lake. The Central Valley Project begins in our backyard and continues to provide water throughout California. We understand the importance of protecting water quality, and we support regulations that result in meaningful improvements. But those regulations also need to make sense for the communities they regulate. Today, I want to focus on one specific concern with the proposed MS4 permit for small cities: the use of census urban area boundaries to determine waiver eligibility. First, census urban areas were not created to be regulatory boundaries. They are statistical boundaries based primarily on population and development. They do not tell us where the city's jurisdiction ends, where its stormwater system exists, or most importantly, where the stormwater actually flows. The proposed permit recognizes jurisdictional drainage and boundaries when defining an MS4. We believe those actual boundaries should also matter when determining waiver eligibility. Second, our current approach directly impacts Shasta Lake. Waiver option 3 is intended for MS4 serving 20,000 people or less, with a median household income below 80% of statewide median. Shasta Lake has approximately 10,200 residents, and our current recent income survey shows approximately 67% of our residents are considered low income. And 80% of our school-age children qualify for free lunches, if that puts that in perspective. These numbers reflect the community we serve. Disadvantaged communities need a voice in decisions like this, and that is why I'm here today. Yet Shasta Lake is excluded from the waiver because we are grouped into a larger Reading census urban area with a population of approximately 120,000. That number does not represent Shasta Lake. Only about 9,400 people within that urban area live in Shasta Lake. We represent roughly 8% of that population. The other 92% lives outside our city, yet that population is being used to determine whether our small disadvantaged community qualifies for a waiver intended for communities like ours. Third, the map shows the same problem geographically. The Reading urban area covers approximately 68 square miles. Only about 5 miles of that is Shasta Lake. Again, roughly 8%. We have no jurisdiction over the 92%. We do not control development there, operate those stormwater systems, or control how those communities manage stormwater. The city should not be evaluated based on areas it does not serve and cannot control. And finally, what Shasta Lake looks like on the ground is very different from what the census designation suggests. When you hear that Shasta Lake is part of an urban area with more than 120,000 people, you may picture a large urban stormwater system with miles of interconnected underground infrastructure. That is not Shasta Lake. I welcome you to come up and look. We are a small rural community. Much of our stormwater moves through roadside ditches, open channels, backyard swales, and natural surface drainage. On paper, we are grouped into an urban area with more than 120,000 people. On the ground, we are a rural community of approximately 10,200 people with a small decentralized stormwater system. Our request to the board is simple. Please allow waiver eligibility to be based on the population actually served by an individual MS4, its jurisdictional and drainage boundaries, and the conditions within that community, rather than the population of a much larger census urban area. We are not asking to be relieved of our responsibility to protect water quality. We are asking for a regulation that recognizes the community we actually are and the stormwater system we actually manage. Simply put, Shasta Lake should be evaluated based on Shasta Lake. We believe this is a reasonable approach consistent with the intent of the state waiver and allows the limited local and state resources to be focused on where they can provide the greatest water quality benefit. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Lugo. Really appreciate those comments. Thanks for traveling down here and providing them in person. It is really appreciated. And I will certainly be asking follow-up on alternative sources of information that can be used to be basing the determination of the waivers off of. So
We're happy to meet with staff and discuss our request.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you as well, Ms. Lugo. Next, I'd like to call up Will Bond, be followed by Diane Wolk, and then Sean Bothwell.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. My name is Will Bond. I serve as the Public Works Director and City Engineer for the City of Shasta Lake. I'm also a licensed civil engineer with 25 years of professional experience in land development and public works. Our city manager has discussed how the census urban area criteria affects Shasta Lake and the waiver provisions that contain within Attachment C of the existing proposed MS4 permit. I would like to approach this from an engineering and infrastructure perspective. Census information should not be the deciding factor for option 3. The waiver process should also be considered for the community being regulated, the stormwater it actually operates, and the conditions on the ground. First, it is important how Shasta Lake developed and how our infrastructure compares to nearby Reading. As City Manager Lugo alluded to this, the communities of Shasta Lake grew rapidly as boom towns for workers during the construction of Shasta Dam between 1938 and 1945. Much of that development occurred before the coordinated underground utilities. So they built houses and later built the utilities. Today, that history is still reflected in the city of Shasta Lake. When the city incorporated in 1993, the city inherited a dilapidated storm drain system from Shasta County. And today, Shasta Lake has approximately 12 miles of storm drain pipes and approximately 380 area drains and curb inlets. Now let's compare that to Reading. Reading is roughly 9 times larger by population, but it has approximately 300 miles of storm drain pipes and 13,000 drainage inlets. So while Reading has roughly 9 times our population, it has 25 times more storm drain pipes and over 34 times more drainage inlet. These are fundamentally different storm drain systems. Most stormwater in Shasta Lake travels by overland flow into roadside ditches, drainage swells, seasonal streams, all of which are dry during the summer. Much of that drainage crosses private property, and the city does not own or maintain many of these drainage features as these locations because we lack the adequate legal and physical access to them. Second, City of Shasta Lake is not one continuous urban environment. The city's southerly boundary with Reading, the closest inhabited structure into Reading, is nearly 2,000 feet away from the southern boundary of Shasta Lake. There isn't a Reading neighborhood on one side of the street and Shasta Lake neighborhood on the other side of the street. There is no continuous urban interface between Reading and Shasta Lake. Yet for census purpose, we are considered a part of the Reading urban area. So it begs the question, should census determination per waiver 3 decide whether a community can be even considered for an MS4 waiver? And I don't think it should. There's also a practical side to this discussion. City of Shasta Lake is a small disadvantaged community with limited financing and staffing resources and no dedicated storm drain fee. We are a staff of 65 people. Yet implementing the MS4 program requires significant resources for trash capture system, trash generation mapping, inspections, logging of discarded items, public outreach, record keeping, and program administration. And I'm not suggesting that cost should determine whether we protect water quality. It should not. However, but when the resources are limited, these resources should be directed toward requirements that are proportional to the actual stormwater system and provide meaningful water quality benefits. And finally, I believe that the draft permit needs to provide some flexibility. There should be an opportunity to look at the facts. Is there a continuous urban environment? Are MS4 systems interconnected? What population does the system actually serve? What storm drain infrastructure actually exists? And what is the actual potential of those discharges affecting water quality? The water still flows according to topography, not according to a census boundary. Back in 2020, the city applied for a waiver under option 3 in the current MS4 permit. The city waited the 180 days with no response from the regional board. When the city notified the regional board of its next steps for its waiver, we promptly received a denial letter from Patrick Palupa 187 days past our initial waiver request. The MS4 permit is still in draft form, and there's still an opportunity to get this right. I urge the board to consider how regulatory boundaries and waiver eligibility are being established in this draft permit. Census urban areas can certainly be one factor, but they should not automatically end the waiver analysis. The permit should allow the regional board consider actual circumstances of the community, its jurisdiction, its relationship to the larger urban area, its stormwater infrastructure, drainage characteristics, available resources, and ultimately its potential to affect water quality. Census geography should help inform the regulatory process. It should not replace sound engineering judgment or an evaluation of the actual conditions on the ground. I urge the board and staff to take another look at the waiver requirements while this permit is still in draft form. I believe doing so will result in a permit that is more technically defensible, more equitable for small and disadvantaged communities, and more directly focused on water quality protection. Thank you for your time.
Thank you as well for yours. Again, also appreciate you driving down here and participating in the workshop, Mr. Bond. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Diane Wolk, be followed by Sean Bothwell, then Karen Cowan, Tess Dunham, and Karen Ashby.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Diane Wolke. I'm a retired advanced practice nurse and public health nurse, and I'm a board member of the nonprofit Safe Healthy Playing Fields, a Beyond Plastics affiliate. I'm here to ask for inclusion of K through 12 schools in small MS4 permits, which has been under consideration since at least 2019. Schools and parks are major point sources for microplastics and toxic chemical runoff from petrochemical plastic playing fields, running tracks, and playgrounds. Consultation with schools and agencies that have a vested interest in keeping these products in schools is giving sanction to their proliferation. Some 870 new installations or 1,100 acres of plastic turf per year. Slide, please. The plastic blades backing an underlayment slide, please. The plastic blades backing an underlying shock pad and infills poured on top of the fields add to the toxic runoff, polluting our soils, surface, and groundwater, waterways, and ocean. Schools generally tie drainage systems into storm drains. Over 16,000 chemicals have been found in plastics. 4,200 are known to be bioaccumulative, persistent, mobile in the environment, and the remainder have not been studied for safety or for toxicity. Less than 1% of plastic chemicals are classified as non-hazardous. Despite claims of PFAS-free, PFAS is still found in synthetic turf. Just 2 days ago, yesterday, the U.S. Court of Appeals for D.C. Circuit upheld the U.S. EPA's 2024 decision to list PFOA and PFAS as hazardous substances under the federal Superfund law. And yes, they do continue to be found in synthetic turf. Slide, please. From PVC tiles to used tire crumb to synthetic turf, they all break down in the environment and more quickly in hot and humid locations. Slide. 6-PPD and 6-PPDQ in tire crumb are decimating fish populations. Cal Recycle continues to offer grants for it and includes synthetic turf as well in their products catalog. The cost for used tire crumb is about 1/4 that of plant-based infills. Slide, please. Which are often sourced outside of the US, have high pesticide content, and are often contain plastic resin. Some have even tested positive for PFAS. Slide. 6-PPD and 6-PPDQ have been found in human blood, urine, and cerebrospinal fluid. Newly released research shows a potential link to Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. Slide. The California Coastal Commission banned the use of synthetic turf in the coastal permit zone in December of 2023 and used tire crumb in 2024, and are now extending this to the local coastal programs. Their decision was based on microplastic impacts on wildlife and aquatic organisms when a study found that plastic turf blades constituted 12 to 15% of microplastics in waterways in the sea and over 50% in near surface waters. Multiple countries now report plastic blades and used tire crumb from sports fields, running tracks, and playgrounds in rivers in the ocean. Lake Tahoe is full of plastic blades. Slide. Synthetic turf is considered impervious by the US EPA in California. They are prone to flooding. For every 1 inch of rain and 1 acre of plastic, there are 27,000 gallons of toxic runoff. 1 inch of snow equals 13 inches of rain. Regulation size fields range from 2 to over 4 acres, and a large percentage of these are supersized. We are heading into a super El Nino year with a predicted historic amount of rain. Slide. Plastic turf is not recyclable. Many landfills do not accept large amounts of plastic carpet. It's often discarded illegally, and documentation shows schools are disposing of these carpets illegally. On the left are 3 used plastic fields from 3 high schools stashed behind one of the schools on a creek with a water treatment plant around the corner. You can see a roll in the water where it is leaching its toxic payload. On the right is agricultural land and a wetlands. With an NPDES permit, it is under hazmat investigation currently. Slide, please. BPMs developed for synthetic turf fields are made from plastic, contributing more micro nanoplastics, toxic leachate, other absorbed toxic chemicals and bacteria. Removal of all micro nanoplastics and toxic chemicals from wastewater treatment plants isn't possible due to the poor size of the filters, which are usually made from plastic, contributing more pollution and kicking the can down the road. Schools and parks are the polluters, and top to bottom are harming public and environmental health with these wholly unnecessary plastics. Please redirect and include K through 12 schools in small MS4 permits. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Much appreciation, Ms. Wolke. Next, I'd like to call up Sean Bothwell, be followed by Karen Cohen, Tess Dunham, Karen Ashby, and then Rob Carson. Morning, Mr. Bothwell. Good to see you.
Good morning, Chair, board members. I'm very happy I made a PowerPoint so you don't have to see my huge head on that big screen. Gonna keep doing that. Next slide, please. Sean Bothwell, I'm the Executive Director for California Coastkeeper Alliance. These are the 5 issue areas I'm going to cover. And I want to flag and not belabor the point in any way, but this permit is 13 years old. And so when we go through some of these issues and issues the other public commenters have, I think we do need to realize this permit's going to be around for another 10 years. So things like schools, ASBS schedules, trash provisions, we're going to be stuck with them for a while. So we're hoping we can get it right. And when I was going through this permit in my presentation today, there's a lot of stuff. The phase 2 permit was one of the first things I worked on back in like 2011. And there's a lot of things that I'm repeating today that I said way back when. Next slide, please. So the alternative compliance program, one thing that maybe is a question/comment is I think I heard that there's the allowance for credit trading to other MS4s. That was news to me. I didn't hear that, but that is a concern and kind of bolsters my points here is I don't feel like the attachment for alternative compliance matches the precedential orders that you set for alternative compliance for MS4s. There's really no upfront reasonable assurance analysis required. I don't believe there's a public comment period. I believe it's just an executive officer approving the BMPs. And so if there is that offsite credit trading, that makes me even more concerned. There is not monitoring. There's one bypass monitoring required, but other than that, there's no actual, are we meeting the receiving water limits? There's no interim schedules, no deadlines to comply with the 85th percentile, and no real adaptive management once we realize something might be wrong. And so our really request here is match what's required in the presidential orders, and we're going to put this in our written comments, but we're actually pretty pleased with the way San Diego's been doing their alternative compliance. Theirs is a little more robust, has a little more rigor, a little more public transparency, and so we're going to be providing recommendations to include some of that San Diego features into this permit. Next slide, please. I think you guys know, I'm a big advocate for stormwater capture, and I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a scientist, but I do think we need to take a step back and think, is this even a good policy to be capturing 85th percentile storm in these type of communities? We're talking about rural communities where their streams are likely dependent on wet weather flows. And so if we're capturing the entire storm, what is the concern for our streams? The alternative compliance program came out of Los Angeles largely, large city where the stormwater MS4 is basically a flood conveyance to the ocean. Not a lot of stream dependent, needs there. And so what we're going to be requesting in our comments is just there to be some type of, verification that this isn't harming the local streams by capturing the full 85th percentile storm. Next slide, please. All right. So the trash amendments. So this is an issue I've been dealing with for a while now. It first came up with the Salinas Phase 1 permit, which was, my understanding, was the first permit that incorporated the trash amendments. And in the draft, the regional board conflated 2 issues. And even in the slides today, it said compliance, track 1, track 2. In the trash amendments, there's very clearly two compliance, portions. There's the chapter on the receiving water, the water quality objective, which is a narrative objective of no trash shall be present. And then there's a completely distinct trash prohibition. And the trash prohibition is where the track 1, track 2 is where you get to compliance with the prohibition. It was never intended that track 1, track 2 was compliance with the receiving water. And so I made these comments back, I believe it was 2019 when the Salinas permit was adopted. Legal counsel agreed with our comments and changed the permits to bifurcate the two to make it clear doing track 1 or track 2 is not compliance with the receiving water. I believe it also popped up in San Diego where we also wrote comments. And so part of me saw this coming because of the SFEPA recent case, but my understanding, and your staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but is you're going to continue to have cause or contribute language because the SFEPA case was about wastewater. This is about municipal stormwater. And so I don't see the reason to conflate the receiving water and the BMPs here in the trash provisions. So, and again, in our comments, we're just going to ask that they be bifurcated, that they be clear that doing track 1 and track 2 is not compliance with the receiving water. And I think that aligns with your position in the fact sheet regarding receiving waters and SFEPA. Next slide, please. All right, so ASBSs. And I think you heard this yesterday from our staff attorney, Marty Farrell. We have a larger issue with the ASBS exemption overall. It needs to be fixed. It's broken. We're not even advocating that it necessarily, be more stringent. We just want it to work. And there are significant problems with the exception. I do very much appreciate staff working to, try to fix some of those problems in this permit. I think we were very successful in the Caltrans permit to fix some of those. But we still see some concerns with the attachment here in the phase 2 permit. Next slide. So these are them, and we have language proposed for each of these to address them. We've also met with staff before on the actual exception on fixing some of those rules, and so we're essentially just incorporating that here into the permit. But we do have concerns that the design targets for best management practices is being conflated with compliance of not altering natural background levels. The monitoring has always been an issue where there's never been that back end monitoring to demonstrate that the BMPs are actually working. We need consequences for folks that aren't sampling. We've gone through all of the compliance plans. And by the way, we're going to have an attachment to our comments going through every one of the compliance plans. Every one of them has some reason why they're not installing BMPs. Some of them are, we just didn't do the monitoring. And so we're just not going to do it. And so there needs to be some type of consequence for folks that aren't doing the sampling when they're supposed to. And then last, I'll just flag there needs to be an actual deadline. This was 2018, these folks were supposed to come into compliance. And now it just says, come to compliance as soon as practicable. And we need to have some actual hard deadlines. We're proposing 3 years with a 2-year extension for good cause. Next slide, please. This is kind of a bigger picture issue, and this is my sad little graphic that I created. But this is essentially what we want to see. We think this is a good policy of how this program should work. There should be monitoring up front. If there's an exceedance, then they need to revise their plan and implement BMPs. And then once those BMPs are met, go back and monitor to make sure you're in compliance. If you don't have an exceedance, then the next time there's a permit term, you do it once again. I don't think it's that onerous to do this. And these are supposed to be the most highly protected ocean ecosystems we have, and yet we're failing them by not really having a program that works when it comes to ASBSs. Next slide, please. All right, this is the comment that I made back in 2011 that gave me flashbacks. But what is MEP? And we're talking specifically about the post-construction requirements. And there are other places, federal facilities, other states, I believe New Mexico's entire state permit, all require higher capture rates than what we do. And MEP is supposed to evolve over time as other states and facilities demonstrate that something is practicable. We need to evolve with that time as well. And so I would re-ask that we consider, is the 85th percentile really maximum extent practicable at this point? And consider bumping that up, particularly for certain areas. Next slide, please. one thing I've been doing this for too long, so this is my just reminder of something. But back in the phase 2 comments or regulatory process, there was a provision in the phase 2 permit back 2011, 2012 to do post-construction requirements based on the underlying hydrology. That we're going to focus it based on are you in a riparian area? What is the underlying features, geology? And that ultimately got pulled out of the permit with a finding, though, that we would collect the data and put it back in the next permit term, which is now. And again, this was 13 years ago. What we did do, though, was we gave the Central Coast the option to do a pilot program. And they have done that program, and I think it's been successful. I believe they have data. And yet this kind of has completely dropped off the map. And so I just want to remind folks that this was a commitment made by the State Water Board in 2013 that seems like it's just been forgotten. Next slide, please. All right, so schools. And I really appreciate the speaker before me, particularly on the 6 PPD, where we're noticing a lot of health impacts, the use of crumb rubber in fields. And I do appreciate that staff incorporated some language around schools, but again, this was a commitment made to folks a while ago, and I understand why it's being taken out at this moment. But again, we're going to live with this permit for a while. Schools are an excellent opportunity for offsite compliance, whether it's other folks permitting the schools to do greening so that we can infiltrate stormwater. There's a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of, heat, health impacts, environmental justice issues in urbanized areas. There's a lot of benefits. And I really appreciate the storms meeting workshop we had back in November. I think that was really interesting and compelling to demonstrate why we should be doing this. The drops program also was really effective. We really enjoyed that. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, and happy to answer any questions. What we're asking for is for you all to consider requiring the schools to at least do sampling, order them to do some sampling of their runoff so we know what is coming off these schools, how much is the pollutant load. Are they, causing a significant amount of pollution that's going into the MS4 and ultimately our receiving waters? And then have an express reopener, because again, this will be around for a while, that once we have that data, that we have the option to reopen the permit and add schools in at that later time. So that, just thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Bothwell. Really appreciate the presentation and the recommendations here. And, heard on feeling like you're repeating things from over a decade ago at this point. At least to have an opportunity to be consistent across your requests. Just actually looking over to Mr. Levy or folks, if there's anything that Mr. Bothwell said that you want to comment on at this point.
Excuse me, Ryan Mallory Jones with Office of Chief Counsel. I did want to just comment, I think, on the issue about the trash provisions, the water quality objective, and the conflating of those things. I think based on the what we saw from the written material you submitted before, that the issue there is just a lack of clarity. We're not actually intending to conflate implementation of track 1 and track 2 with the water quality objective. And I think if you look at the main part of the permit where it references the trash water quality objective, it doesn't conflate to the trash attachment. It's an issue of clarity in the trash attachment referring back. So I think that's just something we're going to clean up, but is not something we are intending. It's not something we mean. On the alternative compliance, we can always speak to more if you have specific questions. I did want to say that there is a requirement for public comment for the alternative compliance in section I-1.1 of the attachment. They're all subject to a 30-day public comment period prior to approval, at least a 30-day public comment.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Mallory Jones. Mr. Levy.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't think I have anything else to add, but we're looking forward to reviewing the comments.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bothwell. Next, I believe I wake up my computer here. I'll just say we'll go to Karen Cowan.
Hello
Good to
again.
see you. Good morning.
Members of the board, Chair Esquivel. I'm Karen Cowan, Casco's Executive Director. Sean, I'm always looking to learn. This is a good strategy. I also don't like my big head up here, so I just might have a placeholder slide. Margie, just you put up my logo every time, it'll solve our problem. We're going to have a couple commenters support me here today. We've got a little bit of ground to cover, so Tess Dunham and Karen Ashby will also be joining our presentation. First, I want to start with a sincere thank you to staff. Since the informal draft was released, there's been a lot of conversations and a lot of really good, thoughtful changes to the permit. So I just want to really, truly start and thank staff for that. And also note that our comments here today are really the integrated feedback of the Phase 2 community. Casco has a very robust engagement with our members. There has been a large working group formed, going through each one of the 6 minimum control measures and thoughtfully providing feedback, elevating up each top issue from those minimum control measures, and then us rolling them all up into the top things. So our comments really are on behalf of the Phase 2 community. I will also note we always encourage our individual members, particularly for their own permit, to submit their own letters. They can provide some local information and additional comments to you as well. Next slide, please. So the key topics we're going to talk to you about today are listed here. The other comments section, just to note as you go through our presentation, we're not going to talk about them. I just wanted to make sure you were aware that beyond the ones we're going to talk about today, that we do have other comments we'll be focused on. The one we are going to talk about today are really the ones where we think it really takes more time and some board engagement, because they're the really hard parts of the permit. So the first 2 comments here are topics are about the receiving water limitations, discharge prohibitions, effluent limitations. And I kind of want to start with a fundamental thing of it matters. Obviously, staff covered it. Mr. Bothwell covered it. We're going to cover it. It's kind of the trickiest part of the permit, but it's also the most important part of the permit. It's foundational to pretty much everything else that the permittees are going to do. And there's been some fundamental changes from some court decisions that really changed from the last time you all considered this permit, even the last Phase 1 permits, how these permits are structured, which is my other note, that the structure matters here. So Ms. Dunham will talk to you about the City and County of San Francisco decision, and the focus there is going to be on, do the receiving water limitations, the end result provisions beyond receiving water limitations fall under federal law or state law? And then I'll talk to you about the practical part. You're going to set this provision. Again, we're not asking you to take it out. That is not the request at all. The question is, the first, again, is it federal law or state law? And then universally, regardless of where we end on topic 1, is what is the practical way that you all want permittees to actually show that they're complying with that provision? And that's really, really, really important. Okay. Next slide. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tess. All right.
Good morning. Is it on? Yeah, perfect. All right. Yep, I'm going there. We're talking legal. I apologize. I know the board doesn't always like hearing us lawyers up here, so apologize in advance. But we cannot, right? This is the first opportunity before this board to talk about the impact of the City and the County of San Francisco case, especially in the context of the MS4 permits. And also the differences that the way it may be implemented by this board and the regional boards in just the stormwater program alone, and why that matters. And so, as Karen said very clearly, we are not, as CASQA, challenging the board's authority to include receiving water limits as a discretionary component of a permit. What we are challenging is the rationale on the fact sheet that says the City and County of San Francisco case does not apply to stormwater permits. So I just want to put that up front, because I think it'll help provide the context of the comments we're going to make, is that there is a distinct difference between, I think, the rationale being relied on in the Phase 2 permit and what we believe the court has said, and some of the challenges with the rationale that's being used by your staff in applying the receiving water limits under the Clean Water Act versus just limiting their application under state law. So with that, next slide, please. So first of all, just to shore it up, what did the City and County of San Francisco case say? This is the ultimate holding of the case, but it is not the rationale. The holding of the case was, in sum, we hold that Section 1311B1C does not authorize the EPA to include end result provisions in NPDES permits. Determining what steps a permittee must take to ensure that water quality standards are met is the EPA's, or in this case, the state's responsibility, and Congress has given it tools needed to make that determination. Clean Water Act sets forth a permit process in order for the regulating entities in order to ensure compliance with the permits. We are going to talk a little bit about the safe harbor and the component of that and how important it is within the structure of the Clean Water Act. Next slide, please. All right. Importance of the case, of course, and the rationale that currently is within the fact sheet. The rationale basically says, because we are including receiving water limits in the Phase 2 permit under 402 PB1XYZ, don't have the exact number in front of me, we are not under 1311, and therefore, case doesn't apply. But what that then ends up meaning is in your permitting program, you will have receiving water limits under the Clean Water Act and the state of California for municipal stormwater permits, leaving those permittees open to citizen suits for failure to comply with the receiving water limit. However, in your construction general permit, which does have, as applicable, 1311 applies, your industrial general permit, 1311 applies, wastewater permits, 1311 applies, that provision will come out. Right? We've seen it in the LACII permit. The receiving water limit was removed from the LACII permit. You now have a very disparate implementation of your permit program and how receiving water limits are being applied and the liability on the individual entities with respect to compliance with those provisions. Next slide, please. In this permit, not going to read these, the permit you have in front of you, what are the end result provisions in question within the Phase 2 permit specifically? There's the discharge prohibition 5.4, discharge prohibition 5.5, and receiving water limits limitations 7.1. These fall within the type of end result provisions that the U.S. Supreme Court was talking about in the City and County of San Francisco case. Next slide, please. And of course, what are they? The problem with end result provisions, why do they matter? Is because compliance is being determined based upon the quality of the receiving water, which may include pollutants from other sources and not just those under the control of the municipality in this case or the discharger, right? It's a soup. It's the kitchen soup, and it's everybody's kitchen soup. It was whatever was left over at the end of the week, and it's what everybody has, and so we are all responsible. And instead, what this does is it creates this compliance on the MS4s, and as Karen will talk about later, without a clear path to how to comply with it. Next slide, please. Going to get to my key points here. Why do we disagree with the rationale in the fact sheet, most importantly? The reason we disagree is because we don't believe that just reference to the section 1311 B1C, it is not, that is not the sole component and rationale of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision. They looked heavily at the context and history of the Clean Water Act, and they said, you know, in the Clean Water Act that we adopted in 1972, we actually took out provisions from the previous Pollution Control Act that did allow such provisions. So it was removed by Congress. That's part of the rationale for the decision that the court came up with, is the historical context of the Clean Water Act. That historical context applies to 1311 as well as 402. We don't see how you can distinguish the application of the historical context from one provision to the other. We also don't understand how you can distinguish between the need to have a safe harbor provision in permits that have effluent limits under 1311 and those that have requirements to comply with water quality standards under 402. The whole idea is you get an NPDES permit so you have a safe harbor. What happens here is we lose the safe harbor while others get to maintain it. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. But we just find it hard to follow the rationale in the fact sheet that that specifically says, well, sorry, City and County San Francisco case, you don't apply here because we're 402 and we're not 1311, and therefore, yeah, these two categories, sorry, you're not subject to it. We just don't see how that works. Just from a legal rationale perspective, when you look at the U.S. Supreme Court decision in its entirety and the rationale that the court utilized. Next. Of course, then what does that mean in context? You know, we are in the process. We have phase 1 MS4 permits that are currently in process. And I believe that there's been guidance issued by the board to the regional boards. Basically, the fact sheet is consistent with the guidance is issued by your staff that 1311 doesn't apply. So if you're in a municipal stormwater permit context, you need to maintain the receiving water limits under state and federal law. We are here today talking about the phase 2 permit, which would also fall underneath that guidance. We know the construction general permit, which was reissued prior to the court decision, because they have effluent limits under 1311, we anticipate that the end result provisions will be removed. We anticipate the same for the industrial general permit. So you now have different standards in your stormwater permitting program. Next slide, please. Our second key point, of course, going back to the permit shield and the importance of it, one thing that the SCOTUS said very clearly was, you know, we need to devise a the act requires that permittees devise a careful plan for protecting water quality, and it could diligently implement that plan. But if, in the end, the quality of the water and its receiving waters dropped below the applicable water quality levels, it would face dire potential consequences. The whole idea, of course, is you are liable if you can't show compliance with those receiving water limits, whether it is under state, EPA, or citizen suit enforcement action. Next slide, please. All right, so, well, at CAFSQA, we complain, but we also like to propose solutions. So here's our solution that we have put forward to your staff. Back in October of 2025, we did submit comments to this board in the wake of the city and county of San Francisco, and how a path forward we believed for implementation of the receiving water limits in the MS4 permit context. Our big takeaway points in that is keep them, but be very clear they are in the permit as a California-specific requirement and are not subject to federal regulatory enforcement proceedings. That is the bottom line component of what we have asked for in what we submitted in October 2025 and what we will be submitting in our comments here today. Karen will talk a little bit more about also the need for permit shield language to make sure that there's a pathway that individuals can absolutely comply with the receiving water limits, even as they are incorporated under state law. This is critical because in parallel at the same time that this case was going through the court, there was another case called the Port of Tacoma case. And it basically said, you know, if the provision is in the NPDES permit, even if it was a higher, more stringent provision than under state law, then it is subject to citizen suit liability or to liability within the program. So by separating out these provisions and making clear that they are not subject to federal enforcement, we can protect the entities from being liable for failure to comply with the receiving water limit, but at the same time, the board can maintain the cause or contribute language in working with entities to clean up and protect receiving water limits. We think that it is an artful solution that satisfies both. There are other, changes that need to go along with this, but I think that's the most important one that we wanted to call out. And next slide. These are kind of some of the specific ways you would go about doing it. Again, we provided these back in our October 2025 comments, which we will resubmit. And again, that is making sure it's separate, making sure there are clear findings, making sure the fact sheet specifically states that it is under two different authorities and whether one is subject to federal enforcement or one is not, and to modify those end result provisions to make sure, one thing we would love to see is that when we're talking about receiving water limits, it's not the broad generic cause or contribute to any water quality objective, but to really focus in on the priorities when we're dealing with stormwater. Because right now it applies to any water quality objective, even those coming into the future, versus focusing in on priority pollutants of concern. And of course, we need compliance pathways for TMDLs, which I'll defer to Karen. She's going to be talking about that momentarily. And then I think my last slide. is just that revise the phase two permit to clearly indicate that the inclusion of the end result provisions are under state authority and are not enforceable under the Clean Water Act. That's really ultimately what we're looking for, and to make that clear throughout the permit. And that's it on my topic. I'm going to send it back over to Karen.
Thank you. All right, next slide, please. So I get to, as Joanne Schneider from Region 8, who's now retired, one of my original mentors would always say, as a practical matter, this is the practical matter part. And the question really is, we'll set aside state law, federal law. As a practical matter, what's your expectation for the permittees to comply with those provisions? So the first point I want to make is that cross-references matter. This has come out of multiple court cases, multiple court findings, that the provisions are functionally standalone. So if you say this here and later over here, you provide a compliance pathway. If you don't link both of those two places together, that to comply with this, you go here. And if you're doing this, it complies with that. You might not actually affect what you think you're affecting in terms of compliance pathways. So I think this is relatively an administrative question, though we did provide this comments in our draft comment letter and the changes weren't made. So then that does beg the question, is this an administrative question, or is it really the intent not to provide the compliance pathways without those cross-references in those two sections? Next slide, please. So the approach that's in the draft order, we don't really think is feasible or practical in general, particularly for the phase two communities. You heard from Shasta Lake some of the direct perspectives of what obviously the constraints some phase two communities have. So what's proposed in the draft order on the alternative compliance pathway is not based on other MS4 permits. It's rather based on the IGP. And our experience to date with the IGP is folks have not utilized this pathway functionally because I think it's completely infeasible and the bar is too high. So that to us, and then applying an IGP facility-based approach to a municipality introduces a lot of other issues not present in other alternative compliance pathways for MS4s. So hopefully what our ask is that we kind of need to pivot to something that considers the municipal structure as well as the statewide constraints and opportunities. Next slide, please. So this is sort of in a very attempted one-slide attempt to summarize what the existing approach requires. There are some significant limitations. Anything that you would be using here, the project itself would have to be downstream of the discharge. Again, recognizing municipality is not a project, but an entire community. The discharge itself could not go to a WOTUS, a water of the state, before it reaches the facility, which is logistically quite challenging. And the discharge wouldn't be able to pass through any jurisdiction that would not be party to an existing agreement for that facility. Those constraints are pretty limiting. From a groundwater perspective, the migration of pollutants can't cause or contribute to an exceedance of a groundwater objective. So to comply with receiving water limitations, we're going to infiltrate into groundwater, but you can't cause or contribute to an exceedance in groundwater. It's almost like a little bit of an Excel reference where we're cross-referencing back to each other. I know we're working on the urban infiltration policy, but I just want to put a kind of a point on this. This is, I think, a really important policy decision point for the board holistically to make of what we're universally trying to accomplish. Right now, I see this as an important discussion point. The other is that it caps future construction. So if you are going to design a facility and go this route, functionally, it has to be able to capture any future development upstream. That is a significant limitation on any future development in a phase two community. And lastly, if you were able to find a project that did all of those things, at the end of the day, there's still language in there that says, if the receiving water quality is still not attained, you've got to go back and do more, which at the end of the day doesn't feel like you're actually giving a viable compliance pathway, a practical one, or one at the end of the day that actually provides a pathway, even if someone were to do all those items. Next slide. So we have some proposed alternatives. Noting for staff, in our comment package, we did only have the first one, and I'll explain why we're asking for two here now. So what our original ask was, it was on a slide that Tess presented when we proposed things back in October. We looked at the statewide approaches to date and sort of bin them into two things. One, there's an implementation plan approach, which many of the regions 5, Region 8 proposed. Region 9 currently uses M Region 4. Region 2 took a different path. We call it the prescriptive path. The reason why we initially proposed it for the phase 2 community is because having a list of things that they can do and focus on and not have to create something separate, we thought was really a little more practical for the phase 2 community. At the same time, obviously, you hear me say we want to incentivize stormwater capture. So when we were looking through what we wanted to do, we didn't want to not have a compliance pathway that also incentivized stormwater capture. And if you're thinking about the phase 2 permit, it's statewide. California is a very diverse state. Communities have very different things. I also think practically communities might need both prongs. If you only chose stormwater capture as an incentive, we know we've heard from communities in Santa Barbara and other places in Central Coast where it's not viable for them to put water into the ground. It could actually cause a problem. They would still need a viable compliance pathway, right? So I think incentivizing stormwater capture as well as providing another approach would be very helpful. Now, in terms of what we're going to propose on that second one, I think we have to put more pen to paper and put a lot more minds together to figure out what we think is practical. I will say the post-construction requirements might be a really good place to start. There's less limitations on the post-construction requirements. They are more of an incentive, more holistic. One other idea, looking at whatever the state is doing, this is like an add onto the menu, not like only thing to do. But the groundwater sustainability plans also happen to be in a lot of the phase 2 communities. They call it groundwater recharge. We're calling it stormwater capture and receiving water limitations compliance. It's water into the ground, right? So if we think of holistically what the state's trying to accomplish, there might be a there of adding that to the menu. So again, the small phase 2 communities might have something where they're not recreating yet another process, but maybe tapping into something that already exists. All right, next slide, please. All right, so in sum for this section, these are all the things we've already said, but someone who likes a summary, you have a summary slide of the things we've asked for on this topic. Next slide, please. Okay, our next topic, trash. Everyone else has talked about it, so it's obviously one of the biggest conversation points. Next slide, please. We did a member survey I believe we did in the fall of 2025. And we did it talking with staff. We all had the same questions. We wanted a little bit more insight before we all came to you today about where folks are really with their trash implementation. We had really good turnout actually across the state of people who responded. Because we're talking phase 2, we had a really good turnout on the phase 2 in terms of numbers as well as diversity across the state. One of our first questions is, do you expect to attain the trash amendments provisions by 2030? Basically split. 53% said yes, they expect to do it, and 47% said they don't, which is two really important ways you can read this. One, there's a lot of communities doing really, really good work, and we want to celebrate what they're doing. Equally, there's a lot of communities that don't think they're going to be there yet. And as I note, we have a very engaged phase 2 community, but these are also the engaged members of the phase 2 community, which means there's a lot of folks out there that didn't respond to the survey, and they probably will have larger struggles than the folks who are even already engaged. Next slide. We asked an open-ended question about what are the successes you've had. I'm not going to go through and read this, but I just wanted to at least note it. There's significant progress, really good progress that the permittees are making, and I think we should all celebrate the great work that everyone is doing. It's a lot of really, really, really great work. Next slide. We also gave them open-ended question on what their key challenges are. And this is their direct feedback, and we sort of bin them into 3 categories. So we'll talk a little bit more about the regulatory certainty and their demonstration of attainment in terms of the permit. Obviously, funding and staffing is an ongoing thing. We're advocating for funding under SB 1180 for this reason. We want communities to get funding where trash is a problem and where we've done studies. Plastics equals trash, and we're trying to get that funding into the communities. And when they have money, they do good things. And the last one I don't want to overlook is the technical and operational feasibility. I thought this was an important point that came from a lot of communities, that they can make huge steps. That final 10% can be really tough to get to. Next slide. All right, so we asked the folks who are not expecting full attainment, how far do you think you are? Because we didn't want this to be binary. I'm going to make it or I'm not, right? How far are they down the spectrum? So obviously this is phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 2 is in green. But for both communities, I think this is actually relatively encouraging, right? Again, these are folks that are at, for the most part, 50% of the way or more already on their expectation side, of course. And then we asked them, how much time do you think you would need to get there? And basically, I would say up to 10 years is really where both, again, phase 1 and phase 2 fell. And then that last slide, or the last column there, if you can go to the next slide, on the need more information, just to dig into that one a little bit more. So that was a recurring theme we did hear from the permittees. They need clear implementation direction. They didn't get feedback or approval on their 13383 order implementation plans. Over the period of time, there's been a lot of conversations on what the final permit provisions would be, and this has been a moving target, adding to their uncertainty. And then the draft phase 2 permit has 30 pages of requirements, which Karen will talk to you a little bit about more, leading to some of the more uncertainty of what actually attainment will be. Next slide. This is a chart of what's been implemented statewide. As you can see, the vast majority of the permittees in the state have not had their permit or their trash provisions incorporated into their permit. Next slide. This is a chart that we wanted to provide. We're not going to go through it in detail, but this end result being that there are gaps between what we believe the trash provisions say, what the 13383 order is required, and what the draft permit is requiring. Next slide. So our recommended solution, consistent with what the trash amendments or provisions, as they may be called, envisioned, it was 10 years from the first implementing permit. As you saw from the feedback from the permittees, they think they can get there in 10 years. I think those two things actually come together rather well. So that is our ask, that you could provide 10 years of implementation from the effective date of the adopted phase 2 permit. Next slide. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to Karen for a little bit more.
And if you don't mind trying to keep it brief, I believe we provided 20 minutes. You had requested 30, and just want to be able to make sure we get to folks. So
understood. Thank you. Okay, continuing on from what Karen just mentioned, and hopefully this will be roughly round 2. I'd like to touch on 3 priority issues with the trash requirements in attachment H that we would really like to work through with staff, where we believe that it's gone beyond the stated language and intent of the statewide trash provisions. The language in attachment H, which is meant to, as identified right within the fact sheet, implement the statewide trash provisions themselves. It needs to be modified so that it's consistent with the provisions and the subsequent 13383 orders, which were very much aligned, as Karen just mentioned. As a very high-level comparison, just to give you a magnitude of order understanding, the draft phase 2 permit language includes 30 pages, roughly, of very prescriptive requirements, whereas the adopted Los Angeles Regional Phase 1 permit includes about 4 pages, and the current revised tentative order in the Santa Ana region is about 9, implementing the same exact provisions. Thus, the draft Phase 2 permit includes a magnitude of order difference in the amount of prescriptive requirements that have been included, many of which, and we can provide examples, are inconsistent with and expand the scope of the statewide trash provisions. Second point we'd like to make, attachment H should be revised so that it allows the permittees the flexibility that it's necessary for the multiple hundred of phase 2 permittees that there are to design, implement, and assess their programs using the methods that are consistent with the trash provisions. The concern is that the draft permit incorporates prescriptive language that is fundamentally requiring the methodology and framework of one method that has been used within the San Francisco region, which, by the way, has its own very unique set of requirements. They are not subject to the statewide trash provisions. And this does not allow the necessary flexibility or use of other equivalent methodologies that are currently actually being used, as Karen mentioned, by the phase 2 communities throughout the state as they're anticipating this compliance deadline. Next slide. Lastly, CASCA is requesting that the permit language allow for an alternative peak flow calculation method for large drainage areas. The draft permit is currently requiring the use of the rational equation in all circumstances. However, engineering practices and the draft permit fact sheet both recognize that the rational equation is most accurate for small drainages with large impervious areas and is not as accurate for large drainages or complex basins. In fact, in those cases, it can significantly oversize the required device. We believe that the statewide trash provisions provide flexibility actually within the language, that it's not a strict requirement in all circumstances, and thus the language of the permit should be updated so that the full capture systems are not oversized, which has ancillary impacts of increasing the footprint, running into additional constraints within the developed environment, as well as the costs. And last slide, I won't go through this because the points are up there, but these are the requests specific to trash.
And I promise we're done, and I thank you. So this is just me wrapping up. So if you go next slide, Margie, these are just the ones that said we weren't going to talk about, so we're not going to talk about them. Next slide. And that's the one where there's some housing considerations. Next slide. All the summaries on one slide of all the asks in our presentation. And next slide, and we're done. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I really do appreciate the thorough presentation and the synthesis of so many MS4 permittees here and information. Looking forward to the written comments here as well, but certainly heard on the major provisions here that you presented for us. Looking to see if folks have any question or comment that they want to provide at this point. Bennett.
Jarma Bennett, Division of Water Quality. I just since it was brought up towards the end with the rational equation, I mean the trash amendments or the trash attachment does provide to use another method if you use track 2, if their understanding is that the amendments allow for the use of an alternative equation for track 1. I think we'd like to talk more about that interpretation so we're on the same page.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Appreciate that comment. Thank you again for the comments. Really appreciate Ms. Cohen, Ms. Dunham, and Ms. Ashby. Next, I'd like to call up Rob Carson, who will be followed by Luke Farrell-Puff.
Thank you, Board. Hopefully you can hear me. My name is Rob Carson. I'm the Program Manager for the Marin Countywide Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program, representing 12 small municipal permittees under the statewide small MS4 permit. I want to thank staff from the State Water Board and the San Francisco Regional Water Quality Control Board for their time and consideration developing the draft permit and associated TMDLs. This is the product of years of work and reflects productive discussions on a wide range of topics regulated by the permit. We appreciate staff's attention to the comments and suggestions made on the informal draft, which reflected over 12 years of implementation experience with the 2013 permit, and which actions were more effective than others in realizing water quality improvements. We recognize that removing the facility inventory and inspection requirements, changing the outfall monitoring program, and focusing the asset management program to stormwater quality facilities improve the efficiency and workability of the permit for our agencies. We hope these changes are carried forward into the final order. While we recognize the improvements in the proposed language, there remain major concerns about the clarity of the regulatory frameworks, the aggressive timing of implementation, and the overall resource demands as proposed. We want to emphasize the comments made by Karen Cowan and the team from CASQA, both today and in the pending comment letter for the draft permit. They reflect a robust input from the member permittees statewide. We will also be submitting written comments on the proposed permit language and urge staff to consider the comments in light of the diversity of small municipalities that are charged with implementing these extensive programs. That diversity is seen within our countywide program and certainly statewide. The diversity of past and current water quality challenges, of organizational capacity, of stormwater infrastructure types and configurations, available resources, all of these things demand flexible but accountable permit implementation options. Among our most significant concerns are the proposed draft permit language is the lack of clear and achievable pathway to demonstrate compliance with receiving water limitations, as so eloquently laid out by CASQA and TESS. We continue to have significant concerns about the clarity of the trash control sections as well as the municipality's inability to meet stormwater control compliance deadline in December 2030. Just anecdotally, of the 12 permittees in our countywide program, only one is sure to achieve 100% by 2030. This is despite the fact that as a countywide program since 2017, Marin has been conducting trash surveys, feasibility studies of over 50 sub-watersheds, designs of more than a dozen large full trash capture projects, pursuing funding initiatives and programming capital improvement projects. Still, we are broadly concerned about the achievability of this deadline. We're urging that a 10-year implementation period be provided. In addition to a structural rewrite of this section for clarity and simplicity, we hope the board can strongly encourage staff to find a way to adjust the strict trash amendment interpretation of rational sizing methods, which from our experience results in oversized large trash capture devices, therefore making them infeasible in many locations due to the numerous utility conflicts and other issues of burying large structural devices under our roads. So we have experience that these locations could be feasible if sized using common engineering modeling practices that have been demonstrated effective for full trash capture in Region 2 and elsewhere. Due to large regional differences in trash, please also consider a deferral of determination of full capture equivalency to the regional water boards. Lastly, we ask for our regional water board staff to work with permittees to address concerns about the large increase in TMDL and ASBS implementation and monitoring requirements to align with effective water quality actions, available resources, and to answer monitoring questions we don't already know the answers to. Again, we thank you, board, for the time and attention to the input on the draft Phase 2 permit and look forward to providing more detailed and additional written comments by the September 2nd deadline. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Mr. Carson. Appreciate your participation here in the hearing and your contributions to this project ongoing and the leadership here at the local level. It is appreciated. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Luke Voropafe, and then I believe our last commenter here will be Colleen Hunt.
Hello, good morning. My name is Luke Voropafe. I am the Stormwater Compliance Lead at the Port of Oakland. First and foremost, I want to thank you guys for having me here today and having the ability to provide comments on the formal draft. As Rob and Karen Cowan said earlier, we know a lot of time and energy has been put in by the state board staff. A lot of our comments on the informal draft have been incorporated into the formal draft. That hasn't gone unnoticed and that hasn't gone unappreciated. So thank you again for that. I have 2 comments and a request for consideration on the formal draft that I'd like to discuss today. As a backdrop, I'd like to say that they're both connected to post-construction stormwater control measures and some of the conditions we face at the Port of Oakland. The Port of Oakland's a non-traditional Phase 2 municipality that is seated at land's edge. We have extremely high groundwater tables and we have clay soils that don't offer high infiltration rates. So infiltration on a traditional sense is infeasible for almost all of our projects. On top of that, our operational constraints or our operations in general pose significant safety hazards when combined with surface level treatment systems. If you can imagine a bioswale right next to an airport runway or taxiway, it might attract birds, and birds and planes just don't mix. So the first comment and request for consideration is to reintroduce the alternative design criteria for lined bioretention systems, otherwise known as flow-through planters, into the draft language. And then in addition to that, expand on the allowances of proprietary devices, namely subsurface treatment vaults, in areas where surface level treatment systems might pose significant safety hazards to operations. And the second request and comment from consideration that I'd like to bring up is tied to some of the exemptions tied to resurfacing and full depth reclamation for routine maintenance in these areas. These exemptions appear to be written for traditional municipal settings, roads, parking lots, so on and so forth, which makes sense, but they don't take into consideration some of the unique characteristics faced by us as a Phase 2 permittee operating an airport and seaport area. Specifically, when we do routine maintenance on our runways, taxiways, and shipping container terminal areas, oftentimes we have to do full pavement replacement. It's routine. It doesn't change the land use. It doesn't change drainage pattern. It starts as a runway. It's always going to be a runway, right? When you look at the definition, the current definition for full depth reclamation, it includes removing, or it includes disturbing the subsurface soil, adding a little bit of cement and emulsifier, and basically homogenizing the entire section. That's very prescribed. It's a little bit different for what we need to do from a safety perspective to keep the runways and taxiways and seaport shipping containers safe. But the end result is the same. Drainage patterns are the same, land use is the same, exposure to soil is the same. The second request is just to expand that definition to include pavement rehabilitation and replacement techniques used on airport taxiways, runways, and seaport shipping container terminal areas. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate those comments and hear the unique challenges that ports face necessarily here in the MS4 permit. So thank you. Much appreciated. Next, I'd like to call, and I believe our last commenter, Colleen Hunt.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Colleen Hunt, Stone Creek Environmental Consulting. I've been working in water quality regulation for 26 years, including 18 years previously with the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board from 1999 to 2017. And I thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I'd first like to acknowledge staff's responsiveness to comments as part of the 2024 informal draft. They worked as collaborative partners with the CASCA Phase 2 subcommittee and incorporated significant updates that are now reflected in the draft 2026 permit. This effort is acknowledged and highly appreciated. I would like to provide two kind of bigger picture comments on the draft permit for the board's information and consideration. Related to attachment H and the trash provisions, and this is echoing some of my colleagues' comments, as we are aware, the trash provisions have a final compliance date of December 2030. This compliance date is included as a requirement in attachment H in the draft permit. These provisions, the trash provisions, were written with the intention of giving permittees 10 years to comply with these requirements. As the trash provisions were adopted in 2015, I think there was an assumption that all MS4 permits would be renewed by 2020 and thus giving everyone the full 10 years to comply. However, and I'll just speak to the Phase 2 permit, with this permit not being renewed in its intended schedule, permittees have yet to be given requirements under a legal and appropriate regulatory mechanism to implement the trash control provisions, and therefore will not be provided the full 10 years to comply as intended. Over the years, the state's response to the delay with the permit and incorporating the trash provisions in a legal formal permitting mechanism, the acknowledgement's kind of been, well, everyone knows what's expected because it's all laid out in the trash provisions, so you should just implement what the trash provisions say, which is true. However, I think the flaw with this reasoning is the trash provisions are not self-implementing, and the state is legally obligated to require implementation of those provisions through a regulatory mechanism such as an NPDES permit. And simply telling people that these requirements are coming and should be implemented bypasses an important regulatory process, which really bears no legal basis for requiring permittees to implement such requirements. In addition, for permittees who have selected Track 2 specifically for complying with the trash provisions, implementation plans were developed under a 13383 order and submitted to the appropriate regional water boards in December of 2018. And while I don't know the statistics statewide, I can state that Phase 2 permittees in regions 1, 2, and 5 have received no comments or approval on their implementation plans. I learned recently that there's a difference of opinion on whether or not these plans actually need executive officer approval. The provisions state that the plans are, quote, subject to executive officer approval. Some read this to believe that subject is interpreted as they will need to be approved by the executive officer, while others have interpreted this to be a discretionary action in which they could be approved by the executive officer, but not necessarily mandated. But in the interim, permittees have been on the sidelines waiting to hear back on whether or not their plans are approved. and hesitate to implement such plans without approval. So I think that there's really the issue with the December 2030 due date for trash implementation plans stems from two issues. We have the delay in the phase 2 permit being adopted, and then the lack of communication and feedback from the regional boards on the track 2 implementation plans. As both of these issues are not within the permittee control, I really urge this board to address concerns related to the December 2030 final compliance date prior to the adoption of this permit. I believe the state needs to take action by amending these provisions to extend the final compliance deadline to give every permittee the intended 10 years to comply. I also request the state to put out a formal statement on the interpretation of whether or not a track 2 implementation plan needs to be approved by an executive officer. I also have one more comment, a general comment. I would just like to make a comment about attachment E, provisions for non-traditional small MS4 permittees. Unlike traditional permittees such as cities or counties, non-traditional permittees lack regulatory authority over land uses and only have the ability to implement control measures within their own property and within their own activities. There are several areas in the draft order of attachment E that are not consistent with non-traditional permittees' unique jurisdictions. Primarily sections such as legal authority, post-construction, and illicit discharge, priority area inspection include requirements for implementation that are consistent and appropriate for a traditional permittee jurisdictions, but not necessarily applicable for non-traditional. I plan to provide written comments with specific references, but would like to acknowledge in today's forum the need for non-traditional permittees limited authority to be fully acknowledged in attachment E. That concludes my comments, and I appreciate the time to provide those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hunt, and we're very appreciative of those comments and appreciative of everyone's comments here today. A lot of thanks and appreciation to the staff and the engagement that's gone on to get us to this point on the draft permit. I feel we're definitely getting here close, if not still some significant issues that folks have brought up that are likely going to be needed to be addressed. I'll look to my fellow board colleagues here in a moment. We heard a lot. There's one thing that I did just want to rest on, and that is the trash provisions and the deadline. It's my understanding that deadline is within the trash provision, is not something that we can adjust here within the draft permit. And so would just like to say that I think a good approach would be simply to reference the trash provision deadlines in case this board takes up the trash provisions and makes some adjustment to that deadline. But it's not something that we would be able to address here within the permit itself. It would have to be the trash provisions opened up, to my understanding, to be addressed. And so I appreciate, the concern, the desire for, a 10-year compliance window, and the challenges that have been brought up when here we're late on the reissuance here of our small MS4 permit, let alone some of the ambiguity, it sounds like, when it comes to the approval of some of the track 2 proposals that are already out there pending before the regions. And so I don't know if folks wanted to make further comment around that, but it is something that I just wanted to at least kind of rest on, hearing, again, the repeated request that we somehow allow for the deadline to not be held at 2030. But yeah, nothing further. Okay. Appreciate that. Well, other than that comment for now, I do look forward to the written comments and further digestion of everything, and briefing and discussion with staff. But look to my fellow board colleagues for comments and questions for what they've heard here. And
go to Board Member Morgan and then Board Member McGuire.
And good morning. Just wanted to echo the chair's appreciation for staff and working, to bring this permit to this level. I know it's been a heavy lift and there's been a lot of coordination, and also just, bringing it here today for the workshop so that we can hear from interested parties and work through the final items here. So just, what I'm hearing is there seems like there's a couple of sections that need some further clarification. Also, just looking at requirements of whether or not if there's areas where we're being overly prescriptive, want to make sure there is a balance where we're providing clear guidance, clear understanding of what the expectations are, and then also leaving the room for regional differences and differences within areas of the state so that the appropriate measures can be taken into account to make sure that at the end we're reaching the end goal. So just wanted to state that there. I want to thank everyone who's participated today and provided comment. Definitely looking forward to the written comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, thank you for to all the commenters for the really constructive and thoughtful input today. There's a lot to digest here, and I've been anxiously awaiting the update to this phase 2 permit for some years now. So I'm glad we're here at the step. So we've come a long way, certainly from where we've been, but I sense that there's still some pretty significant issues to work through still. And I appreciate, Chair Esquivel, your comments about the trash provisions and the idea about referencing the deadline. But I just want to say that I'm empathetic to the concerns that the regulated community is feeling in terms of the fact that they don't have permits currently that state what the compliance deadline is. And I remember Ms. Hunt actually providing comments some years ago with these exact same comments about the fact that there hasn't been input from regional boards on the compliance plans. So permittees are kind of in this conundrum where they've got a lack of funding. They have challenges with Prop 218. They have to be able to tell their boards or their decision makers, hey, we need to implement trash capture, but there's no permit that says what they have to do. I could imagine that if I was in that situation, that'd be a very difficult argument to make when they're having to make tough trade-offs and how to continue operating their system effectively. So here we are, and it sounds like there's a lot of new requirements being added potentially. I think there was some comparison to the number of pages this permit has on the trash provisions alone versus some of the other phase 1 MS4s. So I'd like to hear a little more about that difference, if there is one. Because, for example, the implementation, the addition of interim milestones. So, okay, well, what does that look like for an MS4? We're talking about adopting this permit in 2027. The trash provisions compliance date is the end of 2030, so roughly 3 years. What kind of interim compliance milestones would you have in mind over that 3-year period for permittees to actually get in line and show that they're being compliant? So I think, practically speaking, there's going to be a lot of challenges with many MS4s complying with the 2030 deadline. There just is. And we need to be thinking about that, acknowledging that challenge, and coming up with an approach to address those issues. So this is, again, our moment to kind of share that thought, and I want to make sure everybody's hearing what I have to say. The others are, I appreciated the comments on the alternative compliance pathways. And again, my interest in having an updated permit is one that's functionally useful. And we've heard a lot of input on the industrial general permit and the lack of its effectiveness and being able to use the alternative compliance pathway. And so one thing I'd be concerned about doing is perpetuating an option that just isn't very useful, or something that the regulated community couldn't take advantage of. So I want to hear more. We'll see what the written comments say, but I would want to hear a little more about what ideas folks have in terms of making it more useful and something that that can be implemented. And the last comment is I appreciated Coast Keeper's comments about the ASBS compliance plans. This is kind of on a similar vein here to some of these other issues, and that I'd like to hear more about implementation and what it would mean in this permit with the addition of the attachment and the fact that we have a long history here of not being as successful as the SBS exception intended. And so what would that mean through this phase 2 process? So those are the comments I had, not necessarily looking for a lot of input now, unless you have some, but wanted to get those thoughts out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, board member. Appreciate those thoughts. Vice Chair.
Yeah, I concur with what's been said, and would just add to it that I'd like to hear more from staff, at a later time on the census issue regarding the waiver. And then also want to spend some time with staff on the legal issues that have been identified by Ms. Dunham, and also the attachment for alternative compliance and it squaring with the presidential order. So just want to spend a little bit more time on those issues. And then just concerned about practicality. The length of a permit doesn't necessarily in and of itself cause me to have concern if it provides for additional flexibility. But if it becomes unwieldy and challenging, and what does resonate with me is that these districts have to go back to their boards, as Board Member McGuire said, to get funding. And so we want to make it as easy as possible for them to comply, and also to show that it's not overly burdensome in terms of the amount of funding that they have to spend. We want the funding to go in the ground, not necessarily the difficulty in compliance with all of the attachments and various requirements. And then lastly, I think we've done what we could on schools, but I'm still really troubled by this, and just wanting to make sure that we've come together collectively to, as much as possible, provide for incentives so that schools can be partners now rather than waiting till the next round. As we know, it's going to be quite some time before we're able to come back. And so that just continues to be of concern. And then just throwing this out there on the trash provisions, is there something that can be done in terms of additional time or enforcement discretion? Where we can see, for those, I appreciate the survey that Ms. Cowan provided, but maybe understanding a little bit more, where is 50% compliance? How does that line up with some of the things that you all are thinking of in terms of milestones? And, some way to incorporate movement with enforcement discretion, because after all, we're looking for compliance in the end. That's all I have. Thank you.
Really appreciate all those points, Vice Chair, and plus up your comments on schools. And I did appreciate Mr. Bothwell's suggestion at potentially just having some monitoring requirements at the least, and perhaps a reopener, knowing that it may take some time before we get back to the next version of this draft permit, if history is any indicator. Board Member Blumenfeld, any thoughts or comments from you?
No, a lot to digest. I'm just looking forward to reading the formal comments.
Great. Yes, thank you. And on that, just a reminder that the comment deadline is September 2nd at noon, and looking forward to folks' written comments. Looking to see if there's any last minute thoughts from Mr. Levy, Ms. Bennett, Mr. Mallory Jones before we wrap up here.
think I just wanted to acknowledge Board Member Morgan's comment about the kind of what I interpreted as balance between prescriptiveness and not giving enough information on compliance. And I think we've heard some comments about that. We have like the trash attachment that's much more prescriptive, and that's overly prescriptive, and some other parts is not, and there's not enough prescription. And so, I guess that's our job as permit writers to find that balance.
Really appreciate that and acknowledgement, and certainly, again, really looking forward to everyone's written comments. And we can try to continue to balance out the flexibility and prescriptiveness requirements within the permit, and just have something that's implementable and gets us to the goals of ensuring that we're not contributing to exceedances, but importantly, are benefiting when it comes to stormwater as a resource here in the state. And so appreciate those comments. All right, seeing nothing further, this is just a workshop, and so just really do appreciate everyone's contributions so far and at this workshop, and look forward to getting this to a final adoption in early 2027. But we'll have some significant items here to further chew through, and just really appreciate the tone and tenor of everyone's engagement. It makes a huge difference across this work. So just thank you. All right, that concludes item number 9. Appreciate everyone. And it also brings us to the end of our 2-day board meeting. We'll be adjourned until our next board meeting, which will be September 1st. Until then, again, thank you everyone for a good 2-day meeting. Be safe, be well. We'll see you all here in a couple of weeks. Thank you.